Imagine a land locked away by jagged mountains, cut off from the world. This is Laconia, home to Sparta. Forget what you know about ancient Greece, the world of philosophers, artists, and architects. Sparta was different. It wasn't a city that built wonders. It was a machine designed for one purpose: war. Its components were not marble and clay, but flesh and bone, forged in a brutal system of lifelong military service, sustained by a terrified population of slaves, and honed from birth in a training program known as the Agoge. This is the story of how Sparta became the most feared military force in the ancient world, and how the very system that made it strong also guaranteed its downfall. To understand Sparta, you must first understand their greatest fear. They weren't afraid of foreign armies or angry gods. They were afraid of their own slaves. These were the Helots, the original inhabitants of the land Sparta had conquered. For every one Spartan citizen, there might have been as many as 10 Helots. They were not just servants, they were the engine of the Spartan economy, farming the land, doing all the labor, freeing up every single Spartan male for a life of nothing but military training. This created a constant, simmering tension. The Spartans lived in perpetual fear of a massive slave uprising, a bloody rebellion that could wipe them out overnight. This fear wasn't just in the back of their minds, it was the foundation of their entire society. Every law, every custom, every brutal tradition was designed to keep the Helots in their place. And the sharpest tool for this was the Crypteia. Think of them as a secret police, a death squad made up of the most promising young Spartan trainees. At night, they would creep into the Helot villages, armed with daggers. Their mission was simple and terrifying: to terrorize the slave population and assassinate any Helot who showed the slightest sign of intelligence, strength, or leadership. It was state-sanctioned murder, a calculated campaign of fear designed to cut the head off any potential rebellion before it could even begin. The message was clear: stay down, or you will be eliminated. This constant state of internal warfare shaped the Spartan mind. It bred a culture of paranoia, ruthlessness, and an absolute obsession with strength and control. So, how do you create a soldier capable of enforcing this brutal system and facing any external enemy without flinching? You start from birth. In Sparta, when a child was born, it wasn't presented to its parents. It was presented to a council of elders. They would inspect the infant, checking for any physical defects or signs of weakness. If the baby was deemed unfit, weak, or imperfect, it was taken to a nearby chasm and left to die. There was no room for sentiment. A weak link could endanger the entire state. If the child passed this first, terrifying test, their life was no longer their own. It belonged to Sparta. At the tender age of 7, the real ordeal began. The boys were ripped from their families and enrolled in the Agoge, the state-run military academy that would be their home, their school, and their prison for the next 13 years. The goal of the Agoge was not to educate, but to deconstruct. It was designed to systematically strip away every shred of individuality, every ounce of empathy, and every trace of fear. Boys were kept in barracks, intentionally underfed to the point of constant, gnawing hunger. They were encouraged to steal food to survive, but if they were caught, they were savagely beaten, not for stealing, but for being clumsy enough to get caught. They slept on hard beds of reeds they had to cut themselves, with no blankets, even in the freezing winters. Their clothes were a single, thin tunic, year-round. This wasn't just about physical toughness, it was psychological warfare. They were conditioned to endure pain without complaint, to obey any order without question, and to see themselves not as individuals, but as interchangeable parts of the Spartan war machine. Fights were encouraged to establish a pecking order, and older boys were put in charge of the younger ones, instilling a rigid hierarchy of dominance and submission. Their humanity was systematically ground down and replaced with a singular purpose: to become the perfect soldier, a living weapon for the state. After surviving the Agoge, at the age of 20, a Spartan man became a full-time soldier. But graduation didn't mean freedom. In fact, his life became even more regimented. He was required to live and eat in a communal mess hall, a secession, with his military unit. This was his new family. He would live with these men, eat with these men, and fight and die alongside these men until he was 30. Even after he was allowed to marry and have a home, his primary loyalty was to his brothers in arms and the state. He was expected to visit his wife in secret, sneaking out of the barracks at night, as if conducting a covert operation. His entire adult life, until the age of 60, was dedicated to military readiness. There was no other career, no other path. You were a soldier and nothing else. This singular focus on the military had a strange side effect on Spartan women. While men were off training and living in barracks, the women were left to run the show. Compared to their counterparts in other Greek cities like Athens, where women were confined to the home, Spartan women were remarkably liberated. They managed the family estates, controlled the finances, and inherited property. They were also expected to be physically fit, participating in athletic competitions. The logic was simple. Strong mothers produce strong sons. Their bodies, like the men's, were instruments of the state, tasked with the sacred duty of breeding the next generation of Spartan warriors. Their famous wit and outspoken nature were legendary throughout Greece. A Spartan mother's parting words to her son as he left for war were "Not be safe, but come back with your shield, or on it," meaning return victorious or die trying. There was no room for anything less than total commitment. For centuries, this brutal system worked. The Spartan phalanx was the most disciplined and feared infantry formation in the ancient world. Their reputation alone could make enemies tremble. At Thermopylae, a small force of Spartans held off a massive Persian army, creating a legend that echoes to this day. They were the undisputed masters of land warfare in Greece. But the shield had a crack. The Spartan system was incredibly rigid. It was a machine built for a specific purpose, and it was completely incapable of adapting. While other city-states like Athens were flourishing, creating vibrant economies, groundbreaking art, and revolutionary philosophy, Sparta remained stagnant. Its entire existence was balanced on the backs of the helots and the brutal training of the agoge. But this system was eating itself alive. The constant warfare, the culling of unfit infants, and the incredibly high standards for citizenship meant that the number of true Spartan citizens was constantly shrinking. They were becoming a minority in their own land, an elite warrior class slowly being bred out of existence. Their system, so perfectly designed for one type of warfare, couldn't cope with change. Sparta began a long, slow decline, fading into irrelevance as the rest of Greece, and then the world, moved on. So what is the legacy of Sparta? They achieved a level of military discipline and strength that was unparalleled. They created the perfect soldier. But what was the cost? They sacrificed art, philosophy, innovation, and ultimately, their own humanity. They built a society on a foundation of fear and brutality, a society that valued the state above the individual to such an extreme that it ultimately consumed itself. Their story leaves us with a chilling question. What is true strength? Is it the unthinking, unbending discipline of the Spartan phalanx? Or is it the resilience and adaptability that comes from freedom, creativity, and compassion? How much security is worth the price of our humanity? The Spartans made their choice, and their ruins in the lonely mountains of Laconia stand as a silent, stark warning. Thanks for watching. If you want to explore more of the fascinating and often brutal corners of history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next one.